podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Justin.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
Yeah. So in the last few weeks, and I don't think we've talked about this particular individual, this person in the world. Coach Deion Sanders, also known as Prime of Prime Time. He does not like being called Coach Prime. He does not advocate that at all. He's Coach Sanders.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, at least especially from like the general media. You know what I'm saying? That was a thing earlier on when he first came on board. But we probably will touch on that in this conversation. But wanted to talk about what Coach Sanders is doing. Because black college football is important. It's important historically. It's important in a cultural way, particularly to the black community, and probably particularly to particular black communities in a way that other college football is not the same in its importance. Obviously, a lot of black youth, young African American men, young black men play college football at all of the various levels. So there's a relationship there, that we could talk about at some other point. But there's a historical aspect. There's a regional cultural aspect, and then sort of just the long-term sort of dialogue of the way black folks show up in sports, and the sense of having our own, the prominence of historically black colleges as institutions, and sort of the way sports connects with that. And I think most often at this point in time, the way sometimes people speculate sort of the growth potential financially for those schools vis-a-vis sports. And so Coach Sanders, fits into this dialogue or in this space in multiple ways. He's had just a couple of incidents or occurrences in the last couple of months that raised prominence, but also I think this is year 3 of him coaching Jackson State. I think
he came in at the end of 1, did year 2, and this is year 3.
Yeah.
So I think it's like year 3 in the context of being like, this is the 3rd year, but I don't think it's the 3rd season fully.
Yeah, I'll have to double check. So, I mean, that was where we wanted to start, was just sort of talking about this. So was there a particular thought or idea, something that was on your mind about?
Yeah, man. So there's a couple, and I know that you have some insight around this. I think where I want to start with Coach Sanders is one, the concept of bringing it home, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a whole conversation through the black community, through a lot of different things, right? This whole, it actually is a thread kind of through the Kanye conversation. It's a thread through a couple different conversations of bringing the talent in. And this idea of when black folks do well, what do we do for our own institutions, right? And so I think, it's important to note for everyone listening that Deion Sanders didn't need money.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not coaching because he needs money. He's coaching because he thinks it's important. He's coaching because they came to him to have a conversation about a school in Jackson State and Jackson, Mississippi, as a broader sense, especially when we look at the water crisis and a lot of other things. Mayor Lumumba. Jackson is a flashpoint for Black people just across the board, even going back to the Republic of New Africa, for those who, may be so inclined to go back to look at the plebiscite where Black people would have their own land, right? And Mississippi was like the capital of that. So there's a lot of history, right, to this conversation. And I think what he has brought to this conversation was highlighting what we don't highlight, right? We love to talk about Black colleges and homecomings, but what we don't talk about is like the games. What we don't talk about is like the spaces that the athletes get to be in, right? Mm-hmm. So historically, we know Black folks couldn't be in certain spaces and certain colleges for a long time. And then we could. And then we started going to those places, right? We saw it in basketball. We saw it in football. We saw it in a lot of sports, right? One of the only sports that you still kind of see Black folks still being at HBCUs in this context is track, right? Mm-hmm. But we also know that Black people HBCUs over-index when it comes to producing engineers, over-index when it comes to producing lawyers, over-index when it comes to producing folks in STEM, right? Just across the board. So I think it's important to note that again. But he's bringing a thing to these schools that have not been there because we have multiple generations of athletes who have gone to other schools, specifically in the South, in schools that have had challenging history. So I think it's one, just to elevate that for what he's doing. I know, again, that you have some other points of insight, but I just wanted to elevate his role in Jackson, Mississippi, and Jackson State's role in like this kind of conversation around sports. And you saw it first, and I'll stop here. You saw it first with basketball. You saw a couple folks like go to Howard, and so a couple blue chips. But basketball is like just like a little different for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. But in football, I think what we're seeing is a sea change in ways that I think is healthy for not just white folks to see, frankly, but for Black people to see. Mm-hmm. And again, like it goes back to school days, you watch the game, right? Like, and like the homecoming game, but like, was everyone really there? Was it really good? Was it really a good game? Like, we're being honest. So I think that is bringing this to a point that's really important. What are some of your takes?
Well, I think with HBCUs and football in a way that's different than basketball, there's potential to create a product. I mean, it's so weird to talk about people playing something else, but I've learned that there's a lot of things that we might think of as like, it's a sport, it's an art, it's a type of music, and someone else thinks about it like product. And how does it position and what sells it and who wants
to buy it? Because when you're selling it.
Yeah. So like I would say I would venture to say that it's probably reasonable to argue that as a product, Black college football has not been maximized, even to like the audience who maybe would be most into it, right? To like track it and like go to the games and go to
absolutely related to. That was my point about like what we talk about when it comes to Black college games. We think about homecomings or particular rivalries, right? Like those are the games people go to.
Yeah, and like the Bayou Classic is the only like Black college game, which I think it still comes on. But even when we were, the younger. And every year NBC would have it on, Southern and Grambling. And it was, it was for me, brother. I like first time I saw it. Like I knew about, we were old. Eddie Robinson was still coaching Grambling. We were young. So it was still like, oh, Eddie Robinson. Yeah, it's like the winningest coach in college football history. And he's been, running the team since, the 60s or something, like a long time. And Doug Williams and other that there was still the thread of the age, which now is much longer ago, but when we were young in the 80s going into the 90s, wasn't all that young of, some of the best black best football players that were black played at HBCUs because they couldn't play at the other places.
Absolutely.
And it was still not totally gone. It was definitely changed, but it wasn't totally over, right? So like, and it was enough of a, I'm sure somebody's got a book about the Bayou Classic that I could find somewhere. So I'll look into that, or at least an article. Because it was something I remember being young, being like, oh wow, that's like game with these two schools, and it's on on the big network on a Sunday, and like around usually that one I think was like the weekend between Christmas and New Year's, which again
absolutely
you remember because you off school and you hanging out, and it's
right.
winter.
You got time to watch it, but time to watch a game, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. It's winter in New Jersey. There's no reason to go outside if you don't have to. Like, it's cold. Like I ain't going out there. I'm gonna go what's on TV. And
y'all was bottom of small rivers though too, so you gotta keep in mind the Rancocas and y'all had them small rivers throwing through them towns, so it's a little different. Y'all had them creeks and shit.
Yeah, it's moisture out there. It's chilly. You know what I'm saying? The breeze off the swamps. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea that like this was a packaged thing that someone who didn't live in the South, like, I could imagine the game has a larger social cachet in the region than it does, on the banks of the Delaware. But it still was something that was like, yo, I'll check this out. This looks cool. Like, let me see what they about to do here. You know what I'm saying? And so you ask the question if, and speaking to the idea, like, cause like the subtext of sometimes, which may not always be fair to the sports or to the athletes that are playing the sports, of like, can Coach Sanders bring a level of attention that makes almost makes the market better for the other schools too, right? Like, so Jackson State can get better, but then is it like, yo, Grambling, like somebody that maybe has the means to be a bigger booster for Grambling goes, well, I don't want Jackson State to show us up, right? Or with the various ways you can access media these days, that the SWAC could get like some kind of ill, you know what I'm saying, streaming based, some super time sports. I mean, all these places do sometimes are being filmed by different production entities. But can that get to the level of attention that like the audience that could maybe most be into seeing all of the HBCUs that do football playing each other, maybe it could grow, right? So there's that lane. But the other lane is that, I don't know a lot about it, and I'm sure that there's some at least slippery things, to say the least, about Coach Sanders moving, because really this is almost a progression from him running high school, right, to that centered on sort of high level athletes who are really good at football, and I think other sports, but I know football was one of them. Then like coming there to play football, and then like getting them to college, right? And so then like going into working in college is sort of a part of that kind of thread of progression. And also I think for him, I think he legitimately likes coaching football. I don't think he's just like coaching football, for shits and giggles, so to speak. I think, he's Hall of Fame football player, one of the greatest football players in the history of footballing. And I think he definitely wanted to coach. And so you have this opportunity to kind of build on that and then kind of create something different and bring some attention to a place that you could make the argument like, when you was young, why didn't you go to an HBCU? Because in the 1980s, if you was Deion Sanders, you went to Florida State. Like, you didn't go if you got to play against the best competition, but also the highest level of exposure to get to the NFL
and support to get to the next level.
Yeah. So
right, and I think we have to be realistic about that. If just to add on, I wanted to say two things is based on your wisdom. One is thinking about this idea of like when we see, again, going back to my point and your point about when we see like the games, right? And you see this Bayou Classic, and it's specific that you see Southern and Grambling, right? And you see this like very, very Southern kind of conversation about football, right? And it really might not have anything to do with the actual talent of the teams, frankly. It has to do with the fact that these teams have this history and culture, right? But I think everyone got comfortable with that to the point we weren't having the conversation about like who was coming to the teams.
Mm-hmm.
We were having a conversation about this is Black college culture. So, you find there's now the game in New York with Morehouse and Hampton. There's a game in Cleveland. There's like games now all over the country. Black college, games, HBCU games. But I think what Coach Sanders did, to your point, thank you. What he did was say, let's shift this from we do it because of tradition and nostalgia to we do it because someone's looking to win a game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a real shift there. And to do that shift there, it's not necessarily an arms race, because I don't want to frame it like that. For one, if you were a child of the 80s, you remember the arms race. So,
Right.
and all they came with the arms race. But also, like, no, and is there an intrinsic benefit for athletes to go to the schools of people who understand them, for them to matriculate, graduate, and become part of a broader community?
Mm-hmm.
The research is in about the benefits and role of HBCUs across the board, right? That's not a debatable point. We don't have to debate that, as we'll go into part 2 of this. Some stuff is not debatable. It's not debatable the role of historically Black colleges, universities in the Black community. What is debatable is, do those places, when it comes to certain populations of athletes, can they get access? And I think that it's important for Coach Sanders to be here because it elevates that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it elevates the conversation of, what can these young people do? And for the young man that was supposed to go to Florida State, right? Which, in the irony, was where, Deion went, right?
Mm-hmm.
Deion, Coach Sanders went. And for him to come and play with Coach Sanders, and also with, Shedeur Sanders, who is a, real Heisman candidate, it brings the conversation of how can we bring attention to these places who have been serving so many people for so long, that are just important places to invest in. And we've seen a lot of different investments in, the science departments. We've seen it in the English departments. We've seen it in other stuff just post the murder of George Floyd, but not necessarily in some of the athletic spaces that then now create the energy around athletes that want to come and, not to go to the NFL, because some of them will get the access, but also being a part of a broader community, which I think is really important about this. And one thing I'll say one more thing. I think, Coach Sanders' perspective is really refreshing, because it's easy for someone to be like, I'm going to stay at Jackson State forever, right? And everyone be like, see, that's a good brother there. He going to stay forever. And he's like, I don't know if I'm staying forever.
Yeah.
You got to have a real conversation when the other people call about what my next move is, not just for him, because he's already good, but also for his staff.
Yeah.
Who, if he's underpaid, his staff is terribly underpaid. And this is an important part of the conversation. And it's not a knock to Jackson State more than it's a knock to any particular institution. If he makes $500,000 a year, I mean, he makes it up from doing whatever else he does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that means the people underneath him make 150, 200. And these are people that in other spaces could make 500,000, could make $1 million. And we have to be honest about that. Him setting up this group of people to be able to take care of themselves and move forward and progress, teaching the thing that they care about so much. So I actually deeply appreciate his honesty, which is sometimes not an honesty we give each other in regard to what we're dealing with a decision.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's the thing that I think is most really even maybe at the core that is important to think about with this situation, because someone with his profile, in one hand, I mean, one just as a black man as head coach in football, as crazy as it seems, it's still always, even if you were a great pro, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a shot to be taken seriously to lead a program, especially a Power 5 school. It's not written in stone, right? You do have to demonstrate that you can actually coach, and then still, because there's obviously there's plenty of coaches, at Power 5 schools that are not, black, that are in other roles. Now some are there. So it's not as it was when we was kids, but it's not the same. So on some level, there are people who definitely looked at this is just a stunt, right? Like Sanders is going there, and I think we can call him Coach Prime for our conversation. We not sports broadcasters, you know what I'm saying? We ain't journalists. we two people adding on. So if you go call Coach Prime, but go ahead and do that. But I don't think that I think that he, legitimately has demonstrated, like, yeah, like for where the program level that this program is, right? And I'm not totally sure the overall funding and size of the school, but my understanding is that, I mean, at least at some level, that Jackson State had some of the things you might need to be a successful program, like a leading program. And then, to go like we will, nah, they, like, not only do they win, they be blowing the doors off sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, right? And then there's, especially given the other aspect that is central to college football, even with this, where we're at in this wild, open world of the beginning of the NIL aspect, is a relationship space, a relationship. And then what is this next step going to do for me, as in the athlete and the family of the athlete, so that athlete either can, I think at a minimum you should make sure they get out of college with the actual degree. But if they are someone who has those precursors, that one would say, yeah, they're going to be among the very small amount of folks who could probably play professional football and make millions of dollars, even if it's only a few million. You need to have the relationships and the charisma, the trust of the families, and the other things to get those players to come to those bigger schools, even with their, fantastic resources and giant gyms and fields and massage, physical therapy, like all the stuff. That stuff still isn't a guarantee that, the best players or the players that you want will come to your school. And
nor that they will actually get to the league. And I just want to say that, like, I think it's important for us to remember that, like, you could have a young person that goes to a Power 5 school and they're really, really, really good at football in the context of which you understand it, right, from what they've done. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be a professional football player for very long.
Yeah. I mean, it's more likely that they're not. but again, the small amount of folks who had that opportunity. So, like, for him, it would be, he would be being wildly disingenuous if he was like, nah, I'm just in it for the Jackson State of it all. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ain't interested in anything else. But I think it's, in a weird way, it opens up the idea that these are also legitimate pathways to, one's career, a career development arc, so to speak. Like, yeah, come to these schools, be a part of the culture here while you're here, do a great job, build a great program. And then if another opportunity is for you over there at some place that's, bigger or has a larger profile or more funding, whatever, go ahead and do that. Like, thanks for your contribution to the institution. Like, there's a weird thing almost, I think, I think it's maybe it's a smaller community thing. Maybe it's black. I don't think it's just a black community thing. But like, if someone is really effective within an institution, in theory, if that institution is a skill set, there would maybe be, it's not unreasonable for that person to have a time period where they serve and work in that institution, and then they move on to another institution, and like somebody else qualified already comes in and leads, said institution. Because the whole idea of institution is it's not just the one person's, or the one individual, but is that entity can continue to create that atmosphere, right? It can continue to provide whatever it does. And I think going back to that earlier part of talking about like, how does this, what is the potential, what is the overall potential that can be brought into sort of the world of HBCU sports. And then, I think related to that, how the role those institutions play in a larger sense, because I think some would on the who comes out of those institutions, absolutely HBCUs graduate more Black folks than anyone else. I think at times I don't know if the overall relationship, even like, there's people that love Alabama, they ain't never been there, they ain't never gonna go to Alabama. They ain't never gonna go, right? And
that's a great point.
I don't know if that always happens with Black colleges. Like, I mean, we definitely had the moment in our youth from a style perspective, right, where you rock different sweatshirts and the do, and that's still a thing. But the sense of like, you feel a part of one of these,
a part of a team that you ain't a part. No, I mean, listen, I think we need to call that shit out and call it what it is. You're a part of something you ain't a part of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, everyone and people know, that know I'm a Duke fan, right? Like, I'm a Duke basketball fan, full out. But I'm a Duke fan not just because whatever. I'm a Duke fan because I was on the campus, because I had the benefit of, family in Durham and going to the campus. Mm-hmm. And actually, and frankly, seeing Black people and knowing Black people that went to Duke in the 80s. Right? And there's a history there. And so, and actually, there's a whole history around architecture and a Black man from Philly who actually did the architecture at Duke.
Yep.
And it was never talked about, right? But we have a lot of that. We have people who love the Lakers and have never been to a Laker game. Right?
Right.
We got people who love all these teams who have never been to a thing. But the idea of, hey, maybe you can love Morgan State. And you don't have to be an alumni of Morgan State to love what Morgan State represents, right? And I think that's to your point, God, I just wanted to add on, that's the opportunity that he's creating. Like, he's fostering this idea that you don't have to be alumni to support an HBCU.
Yeah. Right. Like, I mean, like the same way people will be like irrationally, like, I always liked that team's uniforms. I thought they were cool. And you ain't never been there. Like, you could do
irrationally.
Like, you ain't got nothing to do with that place. Like, I love the way them blue socks look, man. Like, it's cool. It looks cool. So now and the other thing I guess I want to say about Coach, I guess there are two things I want to touch on. I mean, I don't think there was a kerfuffle. You know what I'm saying? And in the height of Black men having a disagreement in public between him and the coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's Eddie Robinson Jr. I'm not 100% about it. But
he's not like the son of, he's Eddie Robinson, but he's not the son of Eddie Robinson.
Yeah. That's why I was like, I don't think that's his actual son.
No, he just happened to be had last name Robinson.
Right. And it seems like whatever they figured it out. I think it actually was a little bit. I think last year they beat Jackson State, and this year, Coach, they got the win back, but they was also kind of trying to run the score up at the end, and he took exception with that. And
AKA stomp the mud hole. Go ahead.
As John Harbaugh said about Stanford tried to score more points on USC when they was blown about a decade or two ago. Not two, but definitely a decade ago. He's like, why'd you try to go for? He said, why'd you try to go for more? Because I couldn't go for 50. He's like, look, I don't care. I want to destroy them.
Football. Yeah, hardball. That's a conversation for a different day. The hardballs are like a different breed of coaches. That's a conversation for a different time. They are a different group of brothers, man.
And I appreciate, kind of like don't run the score up unnecessarily. But then I don't know, some point like, hey, I mean, stop me. Don't let me run the score up on you.
Right. Like, listen, and this is gonna sound wild, but I'm gonna say it. Listen, if they try to run the score up and you punish somebody, fine. That's what they got for it.
Yeah.
And they should have known not to do it. But the fact of this idea of you just shouldn't do it, and I want to touch on the fact of that kerfuffle they had in public, because it also talks about like the SWAC and the idea of, the coach Robinson saying you're not SWAC, which touches on this other conversation about authenticity in the Black community, right? Mm-hmm. And we kind of, when we have to have this conversation about authenticity and who's authentic, because that's really, to me, what it got to. Mm-hmm. Coach Robinson was saying, you're not authentically us. But what makes you authentically us, right? Are you authentically us because you went to a Black school? Like, did you have to go to a HBCU to be authentically a coach of a HBCU?
Right. And I would say you shouldn't have that. I mean, that shouldn't be the case, but it'd be like them unwritten rules of the game type.
It's the unwritten rules of gatekeeping, right, around a lot of stuff, which again obscures the fact that in different ways, Black folks have went to a lot of different places. Like, it should not be lost on anyone that of the quote unquote Divine Nine, the Alphas started at Cornell.
Right.
And the Kappas started at Indiana University. Right. Now, again, the rest of them all started at Howard, right? So it all gets obscured. except for the Iotas that started at Morgan. I want to make sure I note that. Yeah. And then Swing Phi Swing, and I think also that started at Morgan, and Groove Phi Groove and Swing Phi Swing, who also started, because also sometimes we forget about those particular organizations. Mm-hmm. We're not gonna talk about Wineside Phi and Beta.
We want to go so deep in the well.
Yeah, we're not gonna go so deep in the well. Go to Wineside Phi. Shout out to the Grand Grape, as they call them. That's, you can do your own research about the Grand Grape. But like those schools and those Black folks were going to those schools in 1911, in 1912, and 1913. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make them less part of the Black community. So it does get to a level of gatekeeping, right? That we have to. It doesn't mean you're calling it out. It just means we're acknowledging that that's real, right?
Yeah. And the only thing I wanted to close on them having that kerfuffle is that, like, you can have a kerfuffle in the public space, and then like we could all move on. Like, y'all say what you had to say. It don't have to be the end of the world. We don't got to like revisit it 2-3 weeks later. Like, and I guess we are in a sense, but we're not in a sense because we're not, neither one was writing an email to the university like something has to be done about those two having an argument. Like, no, nothing has to be done. It's over. Like, it happened. Everybody move on. You know what I mean? Like, but the tension there, and that's what I'm saying, like, for the one thing I can, for folks who went to HBCUs and went to certain HBCUs for sure, there's a sense of ownership and pride and a degree to a level of protection about those institutions that is not saying it's not unfounded. I understand it, but also from a like, where will that institution go perspective, like size, scale, like, does it make space again for like the person who didn't get to go to that school to decide like, this is my favorite school, I want to root for them and like go to their events and learn about what that's happening in there. And I know this is sometimes in this context of sports because nobody's like tracking in what the business department's doing with research, at least not people that aren't involved in business already. But if we could figure out a spectator way to be engaged with those aspects in a more public forum, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, if it's the quiz team or something, I don't know. Like, but how do we make space for other people to like have some admiration for these institutions and be connected to them, while also, trying to give honor to people who, don't want almost the sense of things being mixed, diluted, or tampered with because you ain't really go there. So you can't be, coming, even though, I know a couple people especially that go to one or two different HBCUs like annual like homecoming events, and none of them went to them schools, but they go to the events because they're a whole bunch of older girls.
Because you black and shit, man. Listen, man, you black and shit, man. Like, yo, like, you know what I'm saying? Because the reality of it is that some people's families went there. Again, like, I acknowledge and support why people want to be very intentional about what's happening, but we gotta open it up a little bit, and I do think Coach Prime is creating a context for opening it up a little bit. So
so props to Coach Prime. Keep going. You know what I'm saying? Keep going. And if you decide, I don't think he's gonna go to Auburn. That's the current, like, what if Auburn? I don't. From what I know or have heard about the nature of Auburn, I don't really know. I mean, anyway, I don't know if that's gonna happen. You know what I mean? But props to him. And we want to start on a positive note because I think just due to the nature of the second level, I'm gonna call it second order silliness. Just due to a previous individual we spoke of. What has transpired with Kyrie Irving and the Nets, that we need at least touch base on it in some way. So kind of going from something, fun and positive and full of potential to something full of disappointment and mealy mouth foolishness. Kyrie Irving basically is suspended from the Brooklyn Nets. Sorry, they're from Brooklyn. They're not from New York. They're from Brooklyn. Due to, I'll call it the confluence of actions precipitating from the sharing of a tweet of a film that's I don't know remember the name of the film because I have it marked in my this is not worth my time to watch and dig deeper on category. But a film that noted for its anti-Semitic content and any movie quoting Hitler in a way that in any way could be construed as like, we should really contemplate what Hitler was trying to get at there. Generally I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm out. Like maybe not you're not doing a primary source situation here. We're like, here's what he said in the speech in 1934, as opposed to, anyway, that said what it said. And so I wanted to hear from you just what can any of us
okay, all right, so listen,
positive all right in this situation.
Listen, there's very few times where we're gonna go straight there. Yeah, I know. Listen, I'll say it, and people can send me texts and DMs later about how you say it. There are two things I want to say. There are three things I want to say about this. First thing I want to say is we need to have a conversation about the challenge of the proximity of information in the Black community. Now, I'm saying that as a person who remembers and can talk about the scholars of the Black community, people who did research, people who thought about opening up all the things that we didn't have context to, information we didn't know, when we talk about Chancellor Williams, you know, there's debates about some parts of the destruction of Black civilization. We can have that conversation. John Henry Clark, Reverend Ishaka Barashango. Like, we can have, like, we had scholars who, Sheikh Anta Diop, we had scholars who did the job of unraveling the lies. And let's be clear, the lies that original people were told about who we are in this world and our origin. Mm-hmm. The fact that we get to a point where Kanye, Kanye West, that's a different conversation. But Kyrie Irving says, I didn't learn about none of this stuff. I don't know. And then you take research from a person who is regurgitating, and I want to say this so it's clear and it's fine. You can call me. You can text me. Regurgitating white supremacist tropes.
Exactly.
If we, like I said about Kanye, if we want to have a debate about anti-Blackness in the Jewish community, that is a rational conversation that Jews are having in their community. Mm. And let's say, for clarity, that the Jews are not just white.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of other people who talk about they are Jewish and Israelites, and that's another conversation for a whole nother day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But my point is the fact that a brother feels like there's information that was not given to him, and his thing is to share people around him research is the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems. Number two, what does it mean to have knowledge of self? So I'm just going to let it happen. I'm going to let it fly. What does it mean to have knowledge of self? The fact that people are calling what him and Kanye are working through as knowledge of self is an abomination to having knowledge of self. It's not to believe stories that serve your interest. It's an awareness of your origin in this world. Mm. It's an awareness of your individual and collective origin in this world. And so the fact that people are trying to go to bat to defend these two morons as representatives of having knowledge of self is the bigger problem. And if anyone wants to question why the kids are going the way they are, why is shit so wild? Why kids jumping out of vans? Shit like that. Because at the end of the day, if you think that these morons are the guys that have knowledge of self, well, that's your problem. Let me say for the record, there are at least three dimensions that I will say they don't have knowledge of self. That are not for today's conversation. But they don't. And I respect Kyrie for saying, I am trying to learn about myself. I actually do respect him for saying that. But he got the information from the wrong sources, which means people around him are not sharing the appropriate information with him. And we have to be honest about people are not sharing the information. And here's my third point. And there are times that you're very fiery, Just, and I'll be like, well, my man's trying to tell y'all. So today you can, we'll speak.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Teamwork.
Sometimes you just gotta shut the fuck up. Now, if you were raised in certain backgrounds, certain communities, there were times where people told you that in a variety of different communications. But sometimes, if you're wrong, there is a wisdom to acknowledging that you don't know what you don't know, which is actually tied to the fact of not having knowledge of self. Right. You have to say, I don't have all the information yet, so please pardon me. Not why y'all asking me about this when y'all should be asking me about my people. No, they didn't ask you. You shared something. That's on you with millions of followers and millions of dollars. And anyone that thinks that's not true, you're lying to yourself. Because they did the same thing to Mel Gibson. They did the same thing to other people. If someone came out and said, hey, I think black people came from monkeys, right? They shared a documentary that I think black people came from monkeys. And they said, I didn't watch all the documentary. We're still going to call you anti-black.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you shared something that was actually anti-black. And if you didn't watch it, then it's more on you as an irresponsible person. And in that thing, if you had Adolf Hitler talking about black people, you are more responsible. And I can't let you go because you don't know better. Because guess what? You actually got enough money to figure it out.
Thank you.
So I just want to say that because we're having these conversations. And again, we are not being able to parse out anti-black racism in some of the Jewish community. We're not parsing out the obscuring of not just black Jews, but Jews of color, right? Mm-hmm. There are real rational dialogues we should be having. We could even have the conversation about the apartheid happening in the Middle East and in Israel around what's going on. So I'm not stepping down from any of that, but that's a different rational, rigorous conversation than the goofiness that has been jumped on, not just by homie. And again, I actually do think Slim wants to figure it out. I just think he's down to, I don't know. I'm not gonna tell what path he's down.
I'll take the rock from here. You know what I'm saying? And I want to start with, and just add on to what you said about the concept of knowledge of self, because also part of the concept of knowledge of self, as I came to understand it, is also about the idea of like the commitment to like rigorous self-development, right? Tuning into all the different aspects that make you, and learning the wisdom that's required, the practices that are required to sustain a healthy sense of self, to adapt and change and grow the sense of self as you learn about things that you maybe you thought were one way and you learn it's another way, and you go, oh man, what does that mean for me? I may need to make these adjustments about my life, or my worldview, or my perspectives, or I might need to stop doing something, or I may need to start doing something, and you commit to it as a value and practice, right? It's not just this like place you go and then you get there and you're like, I have knowledge of self. And if you had knowledge of self, you would think what I think. No, I understand I actually have a commitment to a certain set of ethics around myself, and then the sense of self as it's connected to others, because at least most of the folks of the African tradition, the idea of the self as totally not related to other humans is not the thing. That was not the vehicle. That's not the model. So if your idea of knowledge of self is this broad, it's just about me, then you might have missed a couple of notes at the meeting.
You didn't get to the goddamn meeting, man. You didn't get to the meeting if you didn't know it's not just about you. And again, and I want to actually lead with honor about Slim, because I do really think he's trying to figure it out, but it's like, all right, I'm gonna say this. I will stop. Yo, is you Muslim? Is you Hebrew Israelite? Do you believe that the world is flat like Flash Gordon? Like, what exactly is going on? And again, as a process of learning, I respect all of that. But as a process of when we're talking about people who are then defending the Black community versus defending their own, to your point about knowledge of self, are you defending the Black community, or are you defending your perspective? And you're not defending the Black community.
Yeah, no one was defending you. No one was in jeopardy that sharing that video was going to help. Right? This is the touchstone I want to say, and largely this to me, like, one, I think similar to what we said, a conversation about yay. I can simultaneously go, yo, fam, you out of pocket, need to go sit down, and also be compassionate and empathetic that you get what you need to be healthy going forward. Right? These are not actually opposing things. But also, I do have responsibility as a reasonable person to go, fam, go sit down. Like, what are you doing? Where are you going with this? And the thing that I feel is most concerning and it resonates with where you had started with, I mean, I can run names, Renoka Rashidi, Ivan Van Sertima, John Henry Clark, what's my man term, Dr. Joy DeGruy. I got a bookshelf behind me over here.
No, absolutely. Got so many scholars,
serious work,
or organic scholars, and not just ones that went to colleges. Organic, like folks in community who did the work. So it's not just about you having to go and get a term in front of your name or behind your name, but people who did the work.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. That and had a clear ethic about why he was working, even if they disagree with each other or disagree with this person's, approach. And then there's a historiography, meaning there's a context of like the timing of these different things. I was home reading an old printing of J.A. Rogers' 100, facts about the Negro, right? And there was a time in definitely our lifetime, definitely our grandparents' lifetime, our parents' lifetime, where like you just needed somebody to go and write like, yo, these are actual facts about Black people. You know why? Because no one's telling you the truth about Black people. Like you didn't like it's just facts. These are just facts. These are factual things that have historical sources that go, wow, that in fact happened, or that person in fact did that thing. And it was a meaningful contribution to the larger collective of experience for someone to take the time to put that together and then make sure it got into the hands of what? Not just Black folks, other folks. Because you had a apparatus that was daily going, oh, not only are these people worthless and dangerous and shiftless and lazy, they also have no history of ever being anything other than that. Right. Like we have a moment in this present where I feel in a way, and I think maybe it's different in every different epoch, right? Maybe every different, 10 to 15 year span, the nature of the way, this thing that we're living in terms of the human experience tries to reshape itself to maintain power in a certain orientation, that it changes the way that it then, shapes information. But there's an energy that to me rejects a certain level of rigor in the moment, and that opens the door to, well, however I see it, no matter how specious the source for my reasoning, even if it's just I've derived this from my own understanding. So rather than say, well, my understanding or the way I thought about it was this, I go, you kind of do this amorphous, passive aggressive, sort of standing on something, sort of not standing on something thing. And the thing I worry most for that brother is that his pride would not allow him to go, you know what? I have an idea. I thought something and I thought I was doing this and maybe I was wrong on that. I don't think I'm wrong about something I'm working on about me, but I understand I could have made an error. So I'm gonna fall back on just I'm gonna fall back. I'm gonna accept like, yo, I might have violated on that, and I'm gonna keep it a bean and step off for a second and just focus on other things. And just, and just say, yeah, that's it. I ain't gonna talk about it. I ain't gonna bring it up. I ain't gonna send no more crazy. I ain't gonna send no more links to no stuff. Right. I'm gonna take a different approach in my own self-work. Right. But your pride, and there's a certain aspect of our community that goes, don't bend in the face of pressure at any point, even if you're wrong. And if we're going to move, if the idea of that is to bring into creation some new way of being, I challenge those who think that that's the way to go, to make sure so you want to recreate a world where when someone is wrong, as long as they're strong, it's all right.
because they're being a strong brother and standing up for our community. And it goes to, again, a very misplaced idea of what it means to stand up for us. I don't doubt that he's standing up for himself. I don't doubt that he is sincere in his intent, right? Actually, a little different than, frankly, Kanye West.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I don't doubt that Kyrie ever gets sincere in what he's trying to learn. But the point is, just be like, yo, if somebody has some crazy shit in a documentary that just wasn't true, just be like, yo, what you just saw wasn't true, and I shouldn't have shared information that is not true just because it had an intent that I thought made sense. Because that is not rigorous, to your point,
yeah.
right? It is not rigorous to do that, and having knowledge of self doesn't mean that you share things that are not rigorous. Or if it's not rigorous, you say, hey, I want to be clear with you. This is not rigorous. This is an idea projected in order to kind of like, talk about a broader concept, right? We know everybody that was from Africa did not descend from kings and queens. But we also know why we shared that. We know why we all had the Budweiser, what's the names in our houses.
Yeah.
Because it was used to reinforce the idea, again, with the context of white supremacy and racism, that we were nothing, that we were great. So then you get to the context of one day acknowledging, yeah, we all weren't kings and queens, but I still need to see Hannibal in my house, right?
Yeah.
Cool. That's different than some shit that killed 6 million people didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are two different things. And I will stop here. You should never want to use Adolf Hitler as a source.
It just stop. Like if you working on something, everybody that's listening, if you're working on something and you're about to like do a Hitler quote as some kind of exemplary of like explaining something, I'm writing a paper about something and I need to reference the exact thing said in a speech to connect to this other thing. But like you're going like, yeah, like he might have been on to something. If that's what you're thinking, just stop. Just stop what you're doing. Put the paper down, put your computer down, take a walk, call a good friend and ask them. Matter of fact, maybe don't call a good friend. Email me on the Twitter machine or something, because you're probably going down the wrong path and you may not have no friends around to go like, nah, and then everybody, please don't tell me you're a free thinker. Just stop.
Because I want to be clear so everyone understands. If you are black, brown, yellow, so it means African, indigenous, Latinx, Latino, Latina, Latinx, depending on how you arrive with that, Asian, or any variation thereof, you would have been murdered by the same person you want to quote.
Yep. Without a
doubt. Like, that's not a debate. Yoroma, I use the appropriate name, not the name that's been used, you would have been murdered. So this idea that you can share this information, and you can share halfway okay information, is not okay. And it's not okay for Black folks, because Black folks, we created a space where it was not okay to share not rigorous information. And a lot of people spend a lot of time making sure that people had information that was actually correct.
Yeah. And I'll just close my thoughts on this with just the idea, just reaffirm for folks. Your intentions are not cover for the harm caused by your actions. And that's the end of Justice's thought on that. And may we all have brighter days ahead of us.
It's and it's all good. And listen, hope homie can get to the proper scientists. Make sure that we don't confuse the drama in the structural racism with like not being right and exact, which right now I think is being conflated.
Indeed.
So no more to say about that.
Yeah. So as an exit, so as not to leave the evening just rummaging about said things that are sad and disappointing. Maybe just a lighter note. Got a song or a music note, something that you've been finding engaging or entertaining that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, it's funny. So I was listening to one of the algorithm be creating like these soundtracks for you. And I was listening to Confunction and all this kind of stuff earlier, right? And I was, one of the things that I've been thinking is that, in the kind of music space, because of one, this conflation of rap with R&B, we're getting a whole bunch of people who are like Azania and Maurice call it not crooning, but croning.
Croning.
Like croning, like people who are doing some variation of like rapping and singing at the same time, which, if you think about it, it's funny. We look at Candyman and like Domino in the 90s, and then Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Hill House Scratch. Like, the hell is this? Next thing you know, 30 years later, we're still doing it. But I'm gonna use a British artist that I think sometimes folks from other countries preserve elements of our music in America differently than we do, because we're often like, okay, what's the next thing? And they're not always saying what's the next thing. They're acknowledging the music that we created. And her name is Yasmin Lacey. It's an R&B artist. From London. The album that I listen to a lot are two albums. When the Sun Dips 90 Degrees from 2018, and there's an album called Morning Matters. That's more recent from 2020. So I would share that. Just again, thinking about the idea of like R&B and in a more like jazz inflected, singing inflected R&B, where a lot of the R&B males and female singers that we listen to today, voices have let's be charitable and say they are somewhat constricted in regard to their reach. And but Yasmin Lacey is a really strong artist who I would suggest folks listen to on Spotify, Bandcamp, Apple Music, wherever you kind of find music. And if you can support via merch and stuff when she comes to America, I think you'll be happy you did it.
Sort of. Yeah, check it out. I think I've heard that name before. Sounds like something I've heard. So I'll double check. Might be one of the songs that my daughter has played for me over one of the times. Thank you for sharing. So I'll give you some, and I'm gonna go a different route. We lost Pharoah Sanders, passed, returned last month, and we didn't speak about it. I don't think, at least not in detail here, which we don't have to. But I just wanted to, for those who like jazz, and especially if you want to go, as I like to say, to the upper reaches of the of the musical energies. I've been listening to Wisdom Through Music, which maybe some of us might need to tap in. You may need to tap into that concept. So it's a beautiful album. There's a closing song on there, Selflessness, that some of us could use to be reacquainted with that idea, as well as a couple other really beautiful songs. And for those who I know you understand when I say, like, when Pharoah Sanders go up to the upper atmosphere.
Up to the upper floors? Hell yeah.
The upper floor where you get a little, like, he goes up the upper floors, but it's not like 10-minute long upper floors. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of, like, it's only 2 or 3 minutes, and then you come back in. You know what I'm saying? So it ain't the creator has a master plan type situation for those that ain't ready for that. You know what I'm saying? You ain't ready for that. You know, you got that ain't for the faint of heart. That ain't for everybody. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's for everybody, but it ain't for everybody because, you know, it's chosen. You got to choose yourself. But that's another. We ain't gonna talk about that today.
So real quick though, I want to add on just in that context. I want to add on about something that Pharoah Sanders did that I think a lot of people don't tap into, which is, you know, an album, a song. Well, particularly, I want to use a song, and it's called "As You Are." The album is from Love Will Find a Way. It's 77, 78. Really interesting context to this. So Pharoah Sanders did, you know, played with Coltrane, played with Alice Coltrane, did Themby, did the stuff that Justice talking about. I mean, just really just took jazz to another place. Spiritual, what some people call spiritual jazz, which really I would argue is jazz mixed with the history and soul of the blues, right? And returning back to that with just different places where they would go technically. 77, 78, Norman Connors, who played with Coltrane as a kid and played with Pharoah Sanders, had went on to very varied success. He did "You Are My Starship" and all that kind of stuff and did all the R&B shit. And so he was getting money. And he found that Pharoah Sanders was living in the East Village, damn near homeless. Mm. And he went to Clive Davis and said, hey, like, this is Pharoah Sanders. You need to give him an album. You need to give him a record deal. And the album is called Love Will Find a Way. And one of the songs is called As You Are. And As You Are is a song with Phyllis Hyman. And it's one of the songs, As You Are, and also he did a remake of Betcha by Golly Wow by the Delphonics. And it's two of the most powerful songs done by jazz artists and people who have that orientation who did R&B, which I think it's important to remember that a lot of artists who did R&B that we think, oh, they're R&B artists. No, they were jazz artists who had to recognize that the times changed and had to deal with the times changing.
Yeah.
And that's Donald Byrd, that's Ntume, right? That's Pharoah Sanders. That's a lot of artists who had to shift because that was where the music went, right? So there is something to be said for like the artists who brought their musicianship to that thing. But if you could, folks, to listen to As You Are, along with the album just mentioned about Wisdom, like I think it's really important to hear how artists shifted but never lost their musical soul, nor their talent. So just obviously coming from a huge Phyllis Hyman fan, but
yeah. Who isn't? I mean, anyway, I'll stop. I'll just leave it alone because some people out the loop, they don't know. They don't be knowing. How they say, how the people say, you don't be knowing. Something like
they
that.
Don't be knowing.
They don't be knowing. There it is. So, word up. Well, appreciate you guys. With that, I mean, I think that's a good place for the.
I think we said a lot today.
Yeah, you know what I mean? If anybody got an issue, you feel free to send me a message. I may or may.
You can say it with your chest,
right.
Actually. Fuck it. You listen.
Pull up. That's it. When they pull up.
Yeah, we teach the truth, man. Listen, man.
I bring out the coffee cups and the chairs so we could chop it up. I mean, we
rap,
no silly stuff.
Rap a taste.
Yeah. I mean, all right. So with that, I'll say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. This podcast is a part of the Ask Your Oldhead podcast, and we bring these conversations to you due to me. I'm the producer and the sole creator of this, particular vehicle of content and conversation. If you want to support the podcast, number one thing you can do is listen, share the podcast with others, but you can also rate, subscribe wherever you listen to make it easier for others to find what we're doing. Also, you can contribute financially, either by becoming a patron on Patreon of me, Justice Rajee. Just search it and sign up. Also, although not often used, still active. You can go to the Etsy shop and buy a mug or a sweatshirt, whatever have you, and support the work, support the podcast, support the future conversation. It's been quite a year, but I'm letting you know now, in 2023, my individual interviews are coming back. Portraits are coming back. and some other things that you hopefully will see even before this next weekend, in terms of just more conversation, more discussion, more adding on from my particular perspective and slice of life. So thank you for listening again, and do your thing. Also, I know today's the day after election day, so whatever the outcome, wherever you landed in the political spectrum, take the best part for yourself and make good decisions with what happens next. All right, with that, I say peace.